About 2,500 years ago, a people who wrote much of what we call the Bible were violently removed from their homes in Jerusalem. And they were forced to live in the city of Babylon, which is about 900 miles away. Now, as they found themselves wrestling with this new reality of being distanced from their homes, they were distant from their temple, they were distanced from their livelihoods, they were distanced from their community, they were distanced from their sense of safety, they were distanced from everything that makes us feel safe and home. They began to wrestle with that reality, as anybody would, as all of us would probably do. And because of that, they began to ask a lot of questions. A lot of really hard questions that a lot of us have probably asked at one point or another. Questions like, who am I? Really, who am I? What am I about? What am I doing on this planet? Who am I on the inside? What is really unique about me? Another question, and then they ask that communally as well. Who are we? In our world today, I mean, that leads to all kinds of fights, doesn't it? Who are we? And it's wild how that gets defined. I don't want to get too far into stuff today. I don't want to get all gross, but, I just feel like there's an ugliness today with the who are we question. Who are we has turned into who are we not? When the reality is who we are supposed to be, particularly us, is loving and welcoming. Being a people who see others and say, you can have a home here. I don't mean that just as a church. I saw something today that was from somebody in the administration that said that immigration is all about getting only the best people. It's only about getting the best people. Friends, we have never gotten the best people because that's not who we are as a people. The wonderful thing about a sign that sits underneath the Statue of Liberty is that it says, give me your what? Your poor. Give me who else? Who else? Yeah, right? Don't give me your best. Give me your poor, give me your hungry, give me your tired. Give me the people who long to be free. Man, that's the kind of people that we're supposed to be. Now, if we're supposed to be that people as a society, what does that mean for the church and what kind of people we need to be? Man, we should be the same thing. We should live that out to the next level because that's what Jesus calls us to do. What is there in secular language is given to us in religious language, in Christian language, in follow Jesus language. It says that bring your poor and bring your hungry and bring your sick here. Everybody who wants to be made free, that is the good news of Jesus. And so these people were asking questions just like that. Who are we supposed to be while now we sit in this place in Babylon and we're trying to figure ourselves out and it's so confusing and there's so many different virtues and cultural things here that don't gel up with who we are as a people. And then as they wrestled with that question, they began to ask even another question. And what about this God that taught us all this? What about this God that said this is the kind of people we're supposed to be? Is this God still with us? We are 900 miles away from our temple. We're 900 miles away from faith. We're 900 miles away from the things that made us who we are. Where is that God? And who is that God? And are we sure that God is who we think that God is? And then as they were asking that question, again, these questions get deeper and deeper and deeper, and they keep wrestling with them. Then they ask the question, and if there is a God, and if there is that God, again, a question all of us have probably asked, does that God care about me? Maybe that God cares about you, and maybe there is a God, but does that God care anything about me and my life? This ties back into the question of who am I? An answer we often say in the church is, I am a child of God, but how many of us have struggled to believe that? How many of us wondered if we actually have the worth to be called child of God? And see, so as they're asking these questions, they're sitting there going, we're looking for answers to these. We need a way to understand this. We have to talk about this. And sometimes, here's the thing about it. Somebody could look at you and they could be like, you're a child of God. You go, that's nice. I'm not sure. And what about this God? And they say, well, there's God, and He's great. Didn't you read the passage? And you go, I'm not sure. And that's okay. Questions like that are good. That's the tension we're supposed to live in. But the people that we're talking about here in exile, they said there's got to be a better way to answer these questions than just trying to respond to people with some kind of debate. Instead of just responding to people with arguments out of the text, they said there's got to be a different way that we can talk about these kind of questions. And they did the most brilliant thing. They began to tell stories, because stories change us. See, when you're asking a question like, who am I? Maybe one of the things you do is you begin to look at your family tree. And maybe as you look through your family tree, maybe there's some rotted fruit. I get that. We all have got rotted fruit, man. We've all got people that we would love to cut out of our family tree and drop those branches right now. I get it. And I have some of those people in my life. Man, they DM me this week. I said, these are family members? These people like me? I don't think they do. And then I started to think about it, and I was like, well, those are some kind of ugly limbs that I got on the tree. What does that say about me? And then I realized, man, I've got one really awesome trunk on my tree, though. And that was my dad. And my dad, I used this phrase this week and borrowed this phrase from a pastor who said this, that how you die doesn't redeem how you live. And I said, but how you live sure dang does redeem how you die. And as my dad died of an aggressive cancer, one of the things that we realized was the sting of his death wasn't nearly as powerful because of the way that he lived his life. Guys, if you know him, you know that he was grace and he was compassion and he was mercy embodied. He was the things that we talk about at this church in a person. And sometimes you say, well, that's exactly what we were supposed to see in Jesus, and I'm not putting my dad in the same place as Jesus, but I'm saying that we are called to follow Jesus and look like Jesus, and my dad did a really great job at looking like Jesus. So who am I? I'm a son of Bob. And as a son of Bob, I have compassion and grace and mercy in my life. I have someone I can look to and say, I want to live like that. My dad also believed in Jesus. He loved God with all of his heart. And I know because of that, I can be a child of God. Because I look at the stories, I look at the things that he did, I look at the things that he said, and we'll go back and we'll tell stories. And you all do this. You find these people in your life or you find these moments, and you begin to tell the stories about them. Because it answers the question, who am I? It answers the question, who is God? When you're struggling in a moment today and you're saying, I don't know about this moment, I don't feel like God is with me now, one of the greatest things we do is we backtrack and we say, but where was God in these moments in the past? Where did I struggle to see God then? And as I get beyond it, as I get into the next lane, I start to look back and go, oh, he was right there with me the whole time. And you begin to tell that story. That is the kind of thing that the exiles were doing in Jerusalem. Or in Babylon, excuse me. They were telling the stories about who they were. They were telling the stories about who God was. They were telling the stories about the kind of people that they're supposed to be. They were telling the stories so that they could make sense of the struggles they were in. And so as we've been in this series the past few weeks, we've been looking at these stories. We began with the creation story. The creation story was not a story that dropped out of the sky that says this is how everything started. No, instead it was a story told by the exiles to understand who God is. They saw God as love and creative. They saw God as someone who was with them in the mess of things because the world as it began was a mess. That they told the stories not to tell science or not to tell us some kind of history about things, not to get us to debate if it was a 6-day creation or not. That's not the point of what they were telling the stories for. They were telling the stories to say, who is this God that we worship? As they went on the stories, they began to tell other stories. They began to tell stories about times of exile. When the story of Adam and Eve, and this story that we oftentimes think about as our failures, when that's not really what the story is about at all. It's not about a first sin that travels down generationally to every single person. It's about people who are exiled from paradise. And they ask themselves, is God is still with me? Yes, he was with you in the garden, and he's with you in the wilderness. And that's a story that the exiles needed to hear. Because they had been exiled from their paradise, and now they were in the wilderness, and God was still with them. Over and over and over again, those are what the stories tell us, what the exiles were telling us about their experience. Does that make sense? And that's what's amazing about all of the book of Genesis. We can rethink how we've been told to read this book, or rethink how maybe cultures has thought about this book, and begin to see it, because this, and again, I'm not making this up, this is scholarship, this is academics, this is real stuff, that we know that the exiles wrote these stories and wrote them down for us to understand in this way. Now today, I want to continue this because we're getting to the end of this. We have one more week, and then we're done with the book of Genesis, and we're done walking through these stories, these origin stories for these people. Today, we're going to come to a story of a man who wrestled with God. And his name was actually changed to One Who Wrestles with God. Now, I wish that we still talked like this. I wish that we still named ourselves like this. I don't want to put my daughter on the spot that's in here. I'll do the other one because she's not in here. And she's not going to watch the sermon because she's in 5th grade. And sometimes I look at her, and friends, let me just tell you, do we have time for this? We really don't have time for this, but I'm going to do it anyways. Let me tell you her birth story. Not too detailed because Jill's not here. So we had some very fast birth experiences. Part of that is my wife has an incredible pain tolerance. I, like most men, am an absolute baby. My wife is something else. We're very different anyway. Today we're fixing a dryer, and my wife is actually going to be the one who's going to fix the dryer. I'm not the mechanical one. That's what she does. But she has this incredible pain tolerance. And we kind of knew that, hey, the baby's coming. It seems like it's that time. She started doing the whole nesting thing, cleaning, getting stuff ready. Emily came in like 2 hours? An hour? It was less than that. Maggie was like 15 minutes, y'all. We live right down the street. We went to St. Francis, where she was born. It did take us about 10 minutes to get there. It should have taken us, 15 minutes? It took us about 10 because I was going like 90. Because, and I'm just going to say this, my wife was sitting on my daughter's head, I'm sure of it. That baby was almost born in the parking lot. They were doing work on the hospital, and I knocked on the door, and this poor person answers. They're like cleaning the floors, and they're like holding a mop, and they like look at me and go, and I was like, we have to come in. He goes, you have to go around to the other side. And I go, no, we don't. We're coming in. Do you see? You're gonna deliver the baby. He goes, come inside. We ran upstairs. They didn't even get Jill checked in. The baby was born, and then they were like, now what's your name again and your social? And so I would have named her One Who's Born Fast. Okay? Maggie, you would have been like, oh, look, it's One Who's Born Fast. That would have been her name. Now, I don't know what you would have called your children or what your name would be, but we all have a name, and that name is important to us. My name means little king. I don't know. I don't think that really has anything to do with anything, because I don't really feel that amazing. Does anybody have like a really cool name that means something amazing, Justin? Did you say Spear of Justice? Oh, yeah. He should have been a superhero. Can you see the comic now? The Spear of Justice. Halloween. Halloween, that's what you're doing. All right, let's get on because we're gonna run out of time here. His name was the one who wrestled with God. But his name didn't start as the one who wrestles with God. He got to do a name change, which is super cool. I have a lot of friends who have changed their names over the years to better reflect who they are, better reflect their identity, and I think it's cool that they have an opportunity to change their names. I'm going to keep my name, but this guy got his name changed. Now, before he was one who wrestles with God, his birth story named him as the one who grasps the heel. What a cool name. Listen to this. Genesis 25. Isaac prayed to the Lord. We met Isaac last week. He's Abraham's son. God had given a promise to Abraham that he would bless the entire world, that he would build a new nation through him. We talked all about that promise. Isaac was his son who was going to then fulfill that promise, but Isaac did not have a wife. So last week we discovered a woman named Rebekah who married Isaac. Rebekah got married to Isaac because of an incredible trait that she had, which was that she had radical hospitality. The Hebrew people call it a hesed, which is hard to define but easy to describe. It's when you show empathy. It's when you show grace. It's when you show compassion. It's when you show mercy to strangers. And so they told that story, the Hebrew people told that story to remind themselves that they enter God's kingdom every time they show grace and every time they show compassion, every time they show mercy. And that's true for us too. Isn't that cool? So every time we show grace and mercy, we're in the line with Rebekah and Isaac taking part of this promise. So it goes on and it says that the Lord granted his prayer that his wife Rebekah would have a baby, and she did. She conceived. It says the children struggled together within her. If anybody had twins, I don't know what this experience is like, but apparently they were wrestling and fighting all the time. And she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? Apparently this was a rough twin pregnancy. So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, this is their description that the author is giving us, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. And the one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. So it was sort of a prophecy about like this must be what's going on within you. Must be what's happening in your life. And then it goes on, it says, the first one, when it was time for her to give birth, there were twins in her womb. Again, they remind us. And then they say the first came out red. All of his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau, which means hairy. They literally named their son Sasquatch. I just can't even. Then afterward, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. He's holding on to it. So he gets the cool name. They named him Jacob, which means heel grasper. Now again, Esau's name was all about his physical appearance. It just means hairy. But Jacob's name was about his actions, grasping at his brother's heel. But this is not just a random introduction. Again, remember, this is a person telling a story. And when you tell a story, you do this thing called foreshadowing. You don't just say, these are the events that happened. This is why the events happened. And so the author is telling us that he is a heel grasper. This is the kind of person he is. So it's a description of what happened in the story, but it's also foreshadowing of what is going to come in the story. And then we read the rest. It says this. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field. He was famished. And Sasquatch said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished. He didn't even know what it was. He just says, give me your tots, I'm hungry. Jacob said, first, sell me your birthright. It's a bold move. Esau said, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me first. So he pinky promised him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate, he drank, he rose, he went away. Thus Esau despised his birth. Now that's narration. That's just the narrator telling us he despised his birthright. He ate it, he drank, he walked away. He showed no care at all. He gave up his future for his present. Man, there's a sermon there somewhere, but not today. So we talked about their mom, Rebecca. And it's interesting because this is a striking contrast to the story of Rebecca. Again, she showed hesed, right? She showed empathy, she showed compassion, she showed hospitality. When Rebecca saw a stranger in need, she went what was beyond expectations. She didn't just get him water. We know that she traveled like 80 times to a well to get water for him, to get water for his entourage, and to get water for all the camels he had. So she shows just like this next level generosity and compassion. But instead of reflecting his mother's qualities, Jacob saw his brother and his desperation as a predatory business opportunity. I mean, Jacob, when you look at, you sort of think, maybe this guy sort of looks like, the way that he does things. You think this is like the greedy businessman, like manual right here. It's just all predatory. It's what can I get out of you? What can you do for me is the stuff that's going on here. Well, the behavior like this continues. And then many years later, with the help of his mom. See, she's good. She's good. She did a great thing. She also had some of that stuff in us that all of us have, that she also made a mistake here. She helped him steal his brother's blessing from his dying blind father. So again, I want to set this up. Esau and Jacob are born. Jacob is foreshadowed as this one who's going to try to take his brother's place. This opportunity comes up, and his brother comes to him and says, I'm dying of hunger. And he says, sure, then give me your birthright, which is the first step. And he says, give me your birthright. And he says, okay, fine, I'm hungry, I'll do it. And he takes advantage of him. Later on then, he schemes with his mother, and he says, well, I got the birthright, but now I need the blessing. The birthright and the blessing. It's like the double inheritance. It's sort of like, look, I got the inheritance, I'm on the will, but I need Dad to look at everybody and go, the will is what it says. He gets everything. I need you all to hear that. Does that make sense? That's what he's doing. He's saying, I want the birthright and the blessing. He wants both. Rebecca says, I'll help you figure that out. Isaac is old, he's dying, he's blind, he won't know the difference. And so there's a story that they talk about where they're able to trick him into giving his blessing to the wrong one. Now, this is really interesting. For the exiled people who are telling this story, this is exactly what they needed to hear. These characters were not perfect. These characters have a moral complexity. We're not supposed to lift them up as perfect people. We're supposed to lift them up as complex humans. They knew their history. They knew that these people had made a lot of mistakes. But what's interesting is that despite that God continued to work through them. God continued to work through every generation, even though every generation here is shown as making huge mistakes. And so the people who they're sitting there in exile and they look back and they go, well, what about us, man? Somebody screwed up, which is why God got mad. That's why we're in Babylon. Somebody says, well, then just give up totally. Why would we even follow that God? Apparently, if we do something wrong, he just punishes us. I guess, why would we even follow him? Then they tell this story and they say, no, we want you to see something different here, is that God continues to be faithful through those things. Yes, you do end up being responsible for your consequences. Yes, Esau is responsible for selling his birthright. Yes, Jacob still did a bad thing. But what's going to happen is God is going to continue to work through these complex people. And so the exiles say that means that God can work through me too. It's a lesson for all of us. God will continue to work through us even when we feel like we've really screwed up. Well, let's go on. It says this, and this is important here, because while God might forgive us and God might continue to work through us, Esau was not as kind. Now, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him, and Esau said to himself, The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of her elder son Esau were told to Rebekah. So she went and she called her younger son Jacob and said to him, "Your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey your voice. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay with him a while until your brother turns away." So we've got a great, sibling rivalry happening here. I'm sure we all get along with our siblings just fine. I'm sure none of us have any sort of political differences with them. I'm sure none of us have places that we've had arguments. I'm sure we all have, right? Hopefully none of us have sat around loud enough for somebody to hear us contemplating the murder of our siblings, right? Can we all say that's a bad thing, right? Rebekah sees it as a bad thing too, and she says, "Jacob, run. I don't want that to happen to you because I don't want to see you dead, and I also don't want to see your brother as a murderer. So run away, go to Laban. Let's try to get some time and space between you guys." So Esau, in his anger, forces Jacob to run away, and he goes into a 20-year exile. Now, this is going to seem like forever, guys. 20 years to us doesn't seem that long. That's 2005. It's 2005. Just so you're all aware, I just want to throw this out there. 1995 is 30 years ago. That means the greatest albums in music history came out 30 years ago. That's amazing to me. Okay. So this is 20 years. Now, add to that, people didn't live very long back then. 20 years. So he's looking at the end of his life at this point. When you've got life that if you hit 40, you were old. This guy spent 20 years in his own prison. Now, again, this is huge for the exiles. They too had been unfaithful. They too were far from home. They were too wondering, is reconciliation even possible? Or will we die off first? As they wrestled with those kind of questions, the story shifted to answer those questions when Jacob decided to return home. It goes on. Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban as an alien and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female slaves I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." Again, complicated humans, right? We recognize that. The messengers returned to Jacob saying, "We came to your brother Esau and he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Why was he distressed? Well, the context. 400 men doesn't sound like a welcoming committee from your brother, does it? This sounds more like we are in West Side Story is what's happening here. And he's sort of sitting there going, "I am glad to see you, brother, but I brought my peeps with me. I got my entourage. It is going down." That's the sort of thing that he's hearing here, and he's ready to give up, and he's ready to say, I'm gonna run away. He was afraid, and he was distressed. So what he does is he starts to make preparations for what he thought was coming, because he thought a fight was on its hands. He thought a battle was coming. So he sent everyone across the river from him. He wanted them to be in safety. But then he does the really strange thing. Facing his brother, facing 400 people, he stays alone. And that's what leads us to a very, very, very weird part of the story. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me? This story seems like it comes out of nowhere. I mean, it is like, what are we even talking about? That we went from two brothers who were arguing with each other, we're hearing about who they were, and we're hearing about their story, and all of a sudden we get to the scene from Deadpool and Wolverine where they're fighting all night long. And you say, what is happening right now? How did we get here? But there's something really fascinating about this, and this is where we have to dig deeper into it, and then we're going to see why we're reading the story at all. You see, this wrestling match was a radical departure. It was a radical departure from the understandings, the religious understandings, of the cultures of the people that were surrounding the exiles. Remember, every story, every word, every detail, every little narration was them breathing the ancient air of their ancient neighbors and then exhaling a different understanding. This is what our gods are like. This is what our God is like. This is what people are supposed to be like. This is what people are supposed to be like. This is how we're supposed to treat others. This is how we're supposed to treat others. Their stories helped them answer these questions in a way that responded to the people around them. Now, when we think about it that way, we can talk about the ancient gods in those cities. The ancient gods, the gods of Babylon, were distant, and they were angry. So the idea of fighting a deity, either physically or spiritually, was a ridiculous idea. You would never fight a god. And then being blessed and renamed to reflect that reality was even weirder. But that's exactly what happened. Because the story is about to shift here and say this isn't just some random man, but that who Jacob was wrestling with was God himself. Listen what happens. After he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me, he said this to him, what is your name? And he said, my name is the one who grasps the heel. My name is the things that I have done all my life. My name are all the things, the ways that I took advantage of my brother, the way that I stole the birthright, the way that I screwed up with my father. My name is Jacob. Then the man said, you shall no longer be called that. You're no longer Jacob. You are Israel. For you have striven with God and with humans, and you have prevailed. Now, listen to this. Imagine how this story sounded to the exiles in Babylon, because they were wrestling with fundamental questions about God and their identity. And imagine how you feel when you struggle with God. In a lot of places, not this place, but in a lot of places, if you went, I'm not sure about this God thing, it just seems, I don't know, dumb. I want you to know, be clear about this. In this space, we would go, it's fine. This community, this is a safe place to say, I'm just struggling with the story. I'm struggling with what this is even about. There's something about this community, there's something about Jesus I like, but I'm not sure about this other stuff. And we go, that's fine. Because we're here to focus on the Jesus stuff, and we'll wrestle through all the other stuff together. That sounds like fun. This is a place where you can say, you're not just, you're struggling with some things. You're asking hard questions. And that's okay. And for the exiles, this is the stuff that this is what was happening to them. Somebody looks at their neighbor because they're so frustrated about their situation, and they go, I hate Babylon. And I don't even know that I like God anymore. I think I hate this God. And they say, it's okay, let it out. Are you sure it's safe? I don't want him to hit me with lightning or something. It's fine. God can handle it. I'm not sure that God is ever going to answer these prayers about where we're going. And somebody goes, you're not supposed to say stuff like that. Somebody else goes, yes, they are. How do you know? Because I'm telling you the story. Then they read the story of Jacob, his name is changed because he has striven with God and with humans, and he has prevailed. See, they wrestled with big questions about God and their identity. And as they did that, they were told that their ancestors had an identity. That their identity as a people, their identity That Isaac's identity was not dependent on geography. It wasn't dependent on political power. It was dependent on choosing to wrestle with the divine. See, his name is changed to one who wrestles with God. His name, Israel, would become the name of the very people who were exiled. The people of Israel are moved to Babylon, and their name is the ones who wrestle with God. Their identity is not Jerusalem, it's not a temple, it's not political power, it's not a nation state, it's a people who wrestle with the questions about God. What a huge lesson for the exiles, and what a huge lesson for us. And then the story continued, metaphorically showing them how the wrestling would eventually lead to reconciliation. Listen to this, and then we'll close. Now Jacob looked up, he saw Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and two maids. He put the maids with their children in front of them, and then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on ahead, putting himself in danger, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him. He fell on his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. The dude was expecting a sword fight, and instead he got reconciliation. So the man who had just wrestled with God after 20 years of separation was finally able to reconcile with his brother. Now for the exiles, they saw hope in this story, and they saw hope in their story. God wasn't going to punish them for their questions. He was going to use those questions to lead them home. Isn't that awesome? Listen to that again. God isn't going to punish them for their questions. He's going to use those questions to lead them home. And here's where this ties into all of us. For many of us, we've been told that our questions, our doubts, and our arguments with God would be the things that would push us away from our faith. Have you heard that? It's amazing. I'm going to get personal again, and then I'll finish up here. This week, it was amazing to me as I said some things about my personal faith and religious convictions. And I had comments come in, I told you, from people in these family tree that I'm not sure I really want in my family tree anymore. And one in particular was like, you're just a false teacher leading people to hell. And this person looked at my faith and my deconstruction journey and the way that I think and help other people in their journeys of faith and the questions they ask. And rather than seeing that we are following Jesus amid the very hard questions of our lives, she sees that as a way to dismiss that very faith journey. Not just mine, but my friends and people I know who are also struggling through a lot of big questions about the things that they learned about God. And she would say something like, well, your deconstruction and your questions and your doubts, they're just going to push you away from Jesus. And nothing could be further from the truth, friends. You're wrestling with God. Tim, make sure to put this up. You're wrestling with God. I think I have this on the screen. You're wrestling with God isn't a sign that your faith is weak. It's a sign that your faith is real. If you are a person who has deep questions, that is not a sign that your faith is weak. It's a sign that your faith is real. And that is why these people told this story. So they could be blessed amid their questions. So they could be encouraged among their questions. So they could be people who were deconstructing the faith of their fathers to find something loving and new and powerful that would change their lives and transform the world. So this week, here's what I want you to do. I want you to permit yourself to wrestle with God. Whatever is on your heart. Stop keeping it inside. Pray it out loud. Go in the garage if you need to. Scream in an empty field. Don't do it in the mall. Go somewhere where you can wrestle with the questions you have and just say them out loud. Journal them. Write them down. Write a song. Paint a picture. Do anything you have to do. Not to demand answers, but to engage in honest relationship. And you might discover that the God you wrestle with is the same God who will ultimately bless you through those questions, that wrestling itself becomes the thing that transforms you into who you are supposed to be. As my dad sat dying, and I reflected on his life, the thing that I saw in him, the thing that I kept coming back to, is that my dad was never afraid to ask questions that changed the man who he was. My dad grew up in a time where he could have looked at me, he could have looked at my sermons, he could have looked at the teaching of our church, and he could have said, oh, it's going to push you away from your faith. Instead, what my dad did in his old age was embrace and says, I want to have conversation. I want to embrace. I want to see what we can learn together. And I watched my dad change into the person that you knew him as. And that is a huge gift, and that's the gift for every one of us that God has. Let's pray. God, we thank you. We thank you for this text. We thank you for the invitation to ask questions. We thank you for a community where it's okay to say words like faith and doubt and deconstruction. It's okay to be a church where we can have all kinds of questions. Now, the powerful thing about that is that those questions ultimately lead us to Jesus. Because as we question the things in our lives, what we're questioning is your love. We're questioning if you have a plan for us. We're questioning what are we doing here at all. And in Jesus, we see the answers to all of that. That your love is shown on the cross. That your mercy and your grace is shown through Jesus' life. And our purpose is shown through his call to go out into this world, to share the good news of Jesus with everyone around us. That good news for the hurt and the poor and the hungry and the thirsty to come and be set free. Not just spiritually, but physically as we wrap our arms around the marginalized and hurting in our world, and we all walk into your glorious kingdom together. It's your name that we pray. Amen.